Do you wish you had the confidence to speak to the media and raise awareness for your cause? This one's for you. It's Downs with the Kids, the podcast. For this edition of the podcast, I'm sharing some of my tips on talking to the media. I used to work at the BBC and elsewhere, and also have done many interviews raising awareness about Down syndrome. But you don't need all that experience. You can do it too. Just like Matt did, he gives encouragement.
There is actually no need to be nervous. People appreciate what you're there to do.
And there's suggestions on who in the media to approach with your views.
Good morning, it is 9 o'clock. This is Your Call with Nikki Campbell, 0500 909 69.
Plus we hear from a filmmaker who gives a survival guide on how to cope when recording equipment's shoved in your face.
Maybe just think about like 2 or 3 key messages that you want to get across.
Print, online, radio, TV. Why shouldn't it be you telling the world your views? It's Downs with the Kids, the podcast.
Now, as the EastEnders theme tune rang out at the end of last night's programme, the story of Honey and Billy's newborn baby being diagnosed with Down syndrome would have resonated with many families.
Steve Palmer knows exactly how that felt. He has helped the scriptwriters get the story straight. His 4-year-old son, Stan, has Downs.
Not just go to school, but to achieve an awful lot. Yes, he's going to need help, but he's going to hopefully achieve all sorts of things. His brother wants to be a drummer in a band at Glastonbury one day, and, why not?
Yeah,
why
absolutely.
Not, indeed. Steve Palmer, thanks very much for coming in to talk to us, and good luck to Stan.
That was in 2006. Just before that interview, I was sitting outside the BBC Breakfast News studio. I was about to go on to talk about how Stan's story was used as research for a character born with Down syndrome in EastEnders. I wondered if I was about to make a fool of myself, despite my broadcast experience. At the time, I worked at the BBC. But at that moment, I thought, there's something going on here that's far more important than whether I look okay on screen. I have the chance to raise awareness about Down syndrome. It calmed me down and the interview went well. Tempting though it is to worry about how you look or the sound of your voice, when your voice is played back to you, it sounds different to the one you experience in your head, doesn't it? Well, despite all that, it's not about that. You have a vital contribution to make. Media training is good, but it's expensive, so here's my contribution to help you get your message across. TV, newspapers and online in a moment, but first, radio. Some do's and don'ts. Try and go into a studio, whether it's live with a presenter or in another remote studio. Your voice will sound much better compared to if you're on the phone. The exception here is if you ring into a phone-in. Everyone sounds the same on a phone-in, and it's a great way to get your views heard. Most BBC local stations do a daily phone-in, and Radio 5 Live also has one every weekday at 9 o'clock in the morning. As do commercial stations like Talk Radio and LBC. Here's a flavour.
This is BBC Radio Lancashire. 5 Live.
Good morning, it is 9 o'clock. This is Your Call with Nikki Campbell, 0500
Child misses 5 days of schooling every single term.
Your selfish policy of trying to drag Scotland screaming out of the United Kingdom.
Opportunist and selfish. Yeah, Nobby, the unfortunate thing for you is a representative fishing.
Never consume a carbonated drink before you go on air, because this can happen. Arrive on time. I once witnessed a guest cutting it fine and arriving just as his name was being announced. What happens then is you're trying to catch your breath, and then you start sweating. Not good preparation. When you finish the interview, don't put the headphones anywhere near the microphone, as you'll get this. And it might ruin the great things you've said. And what about those great things that you actually say? How do you know how to convey your message?
So my cause is talking about the social care sector for children and young people that are looked after or leaving care. And the whole idea of talking to the press is to raise awareness of the issues that are faced by our marginalised groups, and reduce some of the stigmas and to actually increase the changes that are happening.
Matt Langsford. Matt's done some radio, TV and online interviews to raise awareness for looked after children and care leavers. How was the experience?
It was interesting. So for the first BBC one, where it was a breakfast show and I only had a couple of minutes, it was literally all off the cuff. It was all live. And then when I had the longer interview, I had time to actually prepare for it. And from the first interview, I knew what I wanted to say that I'd missed out, so I was able to include it in the second one. There were a little bits, so it was a bit like, I've already said this, but you've got to give the context for the listener or viewers to know what you're talking about, and why your story matters.
And I think that's right. I think a practice is perfect. I mean, the last time I did an interview on the radio was a few weeks ago. And I just, on the way up to the BBC, I just practiced some turns of phrase in my mind. So when it came to it, it was easier. It was like I had something to draw on. Do you think that's something you might do in the future?
Definitely, yes. I got caught out by not having any turns of phrase ready. But I've learned the lesson. I just need to learn the phrases now.
And what would you say to people? I mean, this podcast is specifically for people who, like me, want to raise awareness of Down syndrome and learning disabilities, but really it's for anybody. What would you say to people who might be nervous about approaching it and think, I better not because I'll make a fool of myself? And what would you say to them?
Certainly, firstly, you won't be a fool. And secondly, go for it. You've got nothing to lose by actually sharing your story and why you're doing what you're doing.
When you did the TV show, did you think about what you're going to wear, or because there were other young people who were looked after care experience there? What went through your mind on that?
So for the Channel 4, when it was obviously TV, the first one was there was an audience with about 30 of us, and there was only 5 of us selected to talk, and we had to have the right clothing on, we had to have makeup done. It was a bit unusual and surreal to have makeup, but just go with it and enjoy the moment, because it is a very rewarding opportunity to be given to actually speak to the press, whether it's in written, blog, audio or on TV.
The last bit there was Matt talking about being on TV. More about TV later in the podcast. And here's a clip of Matt on one of those radio interviews on BBC Coventry in Warwickshire, getting his key messages across.
On your 18th birthday, it's all change. It is all change. You get no support whatsoever. So another example is I got my flat and I was told that I had to pay the van or lose all my possessions for my own independent adulthood, and I was left with a tin of paint and my stereo.
So you've set this charity up?
Yes. We'll sit down and have realistic conversations with them. Say, well, where do you actually want to go with your life? You know, we'll go through a process of planning through what they need to do to get where they want to be as an independent adult and have a successful life.
Matt on the BBC, talking about his support Enhance and Thrive charity, which helps looked after children and care leavers. So, practice turns of phrase. It really comes in handy for when that red light comes on. It's okay to be nervous, but not so nervous that you'll freeze. Be calm and have things in your head. If you have to take notes in with you, bring 3 basic bullet points and use them as a backup. Don't let the notes overwhelm the passion of your message. So that's radio. Still to come on Downs with the Kids, the podcast, TV appearances, plus print and online. Is anything off the record? Newspapers, magazines and online now. It's hard to know what print and online journalists are going to write about in advance, and you can't usually get to them before they write it. If you want to, be like me. So, for instance, the Down Syndrome Association sometimes asks me to speak to the media, and recently Stan and I were featured in the Sun newspaper when actress Sally Phillips wondered if there'd be a world without Down syndrome because of medical advances in pregnancy testing. I gave the dad perspective. I'm on the Down Syndrome Association books as a case study that they can go to. And also recently Stan and I appeared on the Huffington Post for Down Syndrome Awareness Week. But remember to prepare in the same way as you would for radio and TV, and remember that you're never in a chatty conversation with a journalist. Everything is on the record. Be very clear about your message so that they don't massage it. Don't let this put you off, but do remember, if it comes out of your mouth, it's reportable. So, prepare. But I'm also a big fan of writing letters to newspapers. It means that you're adding value or you're addressing something that was factually inaccurate. and the newspaper or website appreciates that you've bothered to write in. This is the same for local as it is for national newspapers, and of course with comments on the bottom of web stories. So for instance, in January 2013, my letter was published in the London Evening Standard questioning whether people with learning disabilities should be stopped from having a social life for their own protection. Still worried about speaking to the media? At least this shouldn't ever happen to you. You may have seen this on YouTube when Professor Robert Kelly tried to discuss geopolitical matters using Skype from his house. It didn't go to plan.
For the wider region, I think one of your children has just walked in.
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy.
And to end this podcast, how to cope with TV appearances. This is the one that people are most likely to be frightened of, but I think in a way it's the easiest. For live TV interviews, you can set the agenda by talking about your cause. Now, if TV cameras turn up and record you for 5 minutes so that it goes into a later news package, then they will only use about 7 seconds in that package. So say to camera what you want to say in about 7 seconds. Practice the sentence and say it several different ways, several times. They will edit. I've done it, you can do it too. Here's Sybil from Flexible Films with advice on TV appearances.
I think just being recorded makes people think that they have to say things that are very clever, and in fact, actually, it's more that they have to be natural, because often they're the expert, aren't they, in whatever they are going to be saying. So there isn't really, they just need to be themselves, really. There's a few tricks on the broadcaster side to that, which is to sort of make the camera a bit less in your face so that they're talking to the person instead. And just getting people to know what to expect is good as well.
And do you get people who are actually nervous? I mean, you've been talking to them and then they really do freeze when you start rolling the camera.
It hasn't happened, actually, very often. It has happened just the once, actually, in the 15 years that we've been doing. And that was probably because the person was quite apprehensive, because they were speaking from a worker's role and they were worried that they weren't getting the policy right.
And, well, and I know that your organisation, you pride yourself on making sure that people do feel very at ease. But sometimes when it's news crews that arrive on the day and they've got to leave and cut it for the 6 o'clock news or something, that they can lose their human compassion a bit, can't they? And treat people like cannon fodder. So, you know, have you got any advice for people on how to cope with that?
I think the best thing is to prepare yourself, actually. So maybe just think about not many actually, about 2 or 3 key messages that you want to get across. And maybe just practice that a little bit, and so know what you want to say, because at the end of the day, they're not going to have long to spend with you. So it's best to make it short, make it quick, and make it feel natural. So prepare yourself, I'd say, is the best thing.
And what about any other tips for survival, what to not wear, etc., or just how to generally approach these things?
Yeah, do think about what you wear, because it is actually permanent. So, you know, the recording is permanent, isn't it? So think about, for example, you know, we did film someone once and they had a string vest or garish colours. That's going to be distracting. But mostly wear something that's comfortable, that you feel comfortable in. I'd say look at the person that's talking to you. It's very unusual to be filmed, but it's really normal to have a conversation. So just look at that person's eyes and concentrate on just having a conversation. And soon you'll forget that you're being filmed. And filmmakers, broadcasters, they just want people to be natural. So just concentrate on the conversation.
It goes without saying that the contribution of people who you campaign for, in my case, having Stan portrayed in the media, it's important because the voice of real people is being heard. Sybil again.
Actually, we've done quite a few films where we've worked with people with learning difficulties, and actually we found that on all occasions they've been great because they'd love the camera for a start. They actually, and you know, the people we've worked with have enjoyed being filmed, and they're not as almost self-critical or self-conscious. So they've been very natural, and they've been really good.
And remember, no one is thinking about how you look, they're thinking about what you have to say. And occasionally, it goes really well. Here's Caroline White, who is a great advocate for Down syndrome awareness, attempting to answer a question, but her son Seb takes over presentation duties on the ITV show Loose Women. The producers must have been high-fiving in the control room.
Oh, look, we've got another loose woman here. Hello. Yeah,
From my own experience, when I was told I had a child with Down syndrome, I was devastated and I assumed I wouldn't cope. But as you can see, he's adorable. He's a typical 7-year-old boy.
It's a lovely story.
And if you don't retain anything else from this podcast, do remember that you have a valuable contribution to make. And it shouldn't be the case that because you're slightly bashful about how you look or sound, that you shouldn't be entitled to make people aware of your cause or address the balance when, for instance, someone says something ignorant. Practice what you want to say, but don't ever stop being yourself. You're passionate about your cause. What's stopping you telling people about it? Remember what Matt said.
Go for it. You've got nothing to lose by actually sharing your story and why you're doing what you're doing.
And Sybil from Flexible Films.
Just look at that person's eyes and concentrate on just having a conversation.
You can do it. And oh yes, never have a fizzy drink before you go on air. Music for this podcast was by www.bensound.com/royalty-free-music. Thanks for listening.